What's new, film buffs? Straight Shooter here, coming at you from Team Sound Studios. As always, welcome to the second review of 3 on this Halloween day 2020. Obviously, you see the title and you might be confused because you're like, damn, that's an old movie. But truth be told, I haven't seen this movie until recently. So, I'm in the process of upgrading my Blu-rays to 4K because I'm big on watching movies at home. I have a 4K player, a TV. I recently got an OLED TV, which I had a 4K, but the OLED is actually a step up even though it's not considered 8K. And movies look really awesome on it. Studios have been releasing catalog movies, which means movies that had already home releases but haven't gotten the 4K treatment yet. One of the movies in my collection as a Blu-ray is Full Metal Jacket. But the thing is, there's a set that recently came out for Kubrick movies, 3-movie collection: Full Metal Jacket, The Shining, and 2001: A Space Odyssey. So in the process of upgrading my Full Metal Jacket, I also decided, hey, I really should own The Shining because I own Dr. Sleep but not The Shining, which is kind of funny. But I guess The Shining is always somewhere on TV. Somebody's always playing it or whatever, cable streaming, whatever you call it. So I've seen the movie a bunch of times, obviously. But the one movie I haven't seen was 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I read up on it, and it's got a lot of critical acclaim. A lot of people talk about it as one of the early influences of a lot of movies that deal with space travel, space exploration, whatever you want to call it. So I watched it. So here's my spoiler review of 2001: A Space Odyssey. The movie is from the 60s. I believe it was 68. And it was the second movie that Stanley Kubrick directed. And obviously his movies have become a lot different as they went on. But this one still has his trademark uniqueness. And I'll go into that more down the line in my review. So the movie doesn't have any actors that I recognize, but all of them put in fine performances. So the movie starts out with a group of primates, and the caption says the dawn of man. There's basically 2 groups of apes, and there's one group of apes that is trying to take the territory from another group of apes. And in the midst of all that, there is this big, black marble rectangular shaped object. I guess they call it the monolith. I don't actually know that they called it the monolith in the movie, but I read up on it and that's what it's called, which is kind of cool because that name has been used in other properties that deal with unidentified objects, not from this world anyway. And one of the primates touches it, and afterward it finds bones. And it takes a bone and starts hitting the ground with it. And then you can see its face, working things out. It goes up to the group of other primates and it starts bashing one of them, with the bone, and ends up killing one of them. And then you see the rest of the primates in his group start to grab bones and start to threaten the other group of primates, off the territory. I don't know what Stanley Kubrick was trying to say exactly, if the monolith channels intelligence and grants intelligence to other beings, if he's trying to say that was how evolution came about, we evolved from primates because of the monolith, because of alien technology. I don't know, but it's an interesting concept nonetheless. And then the movie forwards to the year 2001, obviously, and there's this spacecraft which operates kind of like an airplane. Except that there's different technology, people can walk upside down because there's no gravity in space. and they have these like, I guess, maybe kind of like Velcro, but like kind of grips that help them grip the floor and stuff like that. And people are just flying through space like commercially, which is pretty interesting. So you see this one guy is flying to the moon because he's going to be part of a mission to go onto another planet. And his first stop is the moon. They bring him to where a monolith is. I don't know if it's the same monolith that was on Earth or if it's a different one, but they go to observe the monolith, and the monolith makes noise and stuff like that. Some weird stuff happens. And then he has to go onto another spaceship, and they're flying a mission to Jupiter. And on the ship, there's a bunch of people in suspended animation, or in cryosleep rather. And there's an onboard computer that has AI, or artificial intelligence, and his name is Hal. And he speaks in the movie, and the crew talks to him. And then once they figure out that Hal is a bit he's too driven toward one path and won't accept any advice or criticism from the crew, they decide that they're going to unplug him. Hal finds out because he reads their lips during their conversation, and he starts killing everyone on board. He kills everyone in cryosleep. There's one person that goes to change a satellite outside the ship, and Hal kills him. And there's the one guy that realizes what's happening, and he manages to disconnect Hal and reboots him and stuff like that. So he continues the mission to Jupiter, and that's where the movie kind of goes a little off the rails. He starts heading toward Jupiter, and he sees all this weird scenery and imagery. And it's like 5 minutes of him like flying into Jupiter's atmosphere, and the screen is like nothing that one would expect to see. It's all these shapes and images and graphics and stuff like that. When it stops, he's in this room that looks like it's Earth, and he walks around and saying, what's going on, and he sees somebody else there. And I did a little reading up on the ending because it just didn't make sense to me at all. And I think that was Kubrick's intent upon the first viewing, like, you're not going to get it. And I think he even said, like, no matter what you think afterward, it's not what I intended. You don't know, like, what I meant to say. But I think years later he ended up being interviewed about it, and what he basically said was, when he lands on Jupiter, the aliens take him, and they put him in, like, an observation room. And it's kind of like animals in a zoo. Like, the other aliens watch him as he goes through, like, what he considers his normal habitat, because it looks like a room that would be on Earth. There's a bed, there's a table, there's food, stuff like that. But the last scene is he becomes old. And then you see him, like, all wrinkled and stuff. And then you see just outside Earth, there's, like, what looks like a womb and, like, a head, and, like, an unborn baby looks out the womb, and he's looking at Earth. And I don't know what that's supposed to mean. If he was supposed to be, like, reborn and is going back to Earth, I don't know. But whether you understand the movie or not, the thing to take from it is, Kubrick was a genius back in his time. He could make a movie that people would expect one thing, and he just turns it all around and gives you something completely different. I mean, most of the movie is just like a basic, space exploration. They're trying to chart a planet, that they haven't been to before, and then he turns it into a whole, existence of mankind, existence of aliens, and, what it all means and stuff like that. And it's just very interesting. I think that the movie, even though it was made back in the 60s, you got to remember there was nothing, there was no CGI. Everything that you see on camera is, he had to create practically, and the effects still hold up, and even though the movie was slow paced, it was still beautiful to watch. I mean, some of the scenes, like the scenes of the Red Room in the spaceship, where he had to go to disconnect Hal, the scene where they show in the beginning where the one flight attendant basically walks upside down in a circle, and at first you're like, what's going on? And then you realize, oh, okay, they're on a spaceship and there's no gravity. They're basically eating boxes of juice and liquids, because that's what I guess they can consume in space, because solid food would get everywhere or something. And then the scene when he's landing in Jupiter. I mean, before this movie, you just didn't see stuff like that. I had to remind myself of more than once during this movie that, I'm watching a movie from the 60s. This is before Star Wars. This is before Star Trek. This is before the Marvel movies. This is before, most movies that you think of when you think of sci-fi and space movies. And what's crazy about it, too, is that the movie is rated G. But there's stuff in there that's definitely not for kids, like the primates attacking each other with bones and killing each other, the murderous AI computer on the ship, some of the scenery images. I guess because there was no sexual content, there was no gore, there was no, there wasn't anything overtly scary or whatever. The censors board decided, anyone can watch it. Which I guess makes sense, but if it was released today, it would definitely at least get a PG rating, which kind of raises a question about how far we've come. Because you'd say, like, oh, this is tame by today's standards. But I think today's standards are a bit higher than they were back then, because if this movie can be rated G back in the 60s, it would be rated PG or maybe even PG-13 today. What does that say about how progressive we become? We've kind of gone a little bit backwards, no? Anyway, that's something for another time. But overall, I enjoyed the movie. It's on the long side. It's over 2.5 hours. But I didn't feel like I was bored throughout the movie. And some people might be. I'm sure I know people that would be, but I was into it. I enjoyed it, and it's in my collection, so I'll definitely see it more than once, twice, whatever it is. But it's one of those movies that I think, comes around once in a generation. I'm sure this movie back then was remembered for how great it was. Like, even today, people are still talking about it. Like, it just had its 50th anniversary. And there were articles online saying, what, people are still unpacking everything that happens. What does it all mean? What does it lead to? What does this scene mean? Or, what happens here? Or something like that. So if you can get somebody talking about your movie and discussing it, so long after not only that movie, but after you died posthumously and stuff like that, then you've really created something that's artful. Not just artful, but meaningful. So I have no choice. I have to give this movie an A. That's how I see it. So maybe you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Let me know in the comments. And that's number 2. I got one more for you. Stay tuned, guys.